Okay. So I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Evidence for Faith meeting, where we're going to be talking about Genesis 1, the theology. This is part of a three-part series, where the first one was Genesis 1, the drama, where I treated Genesis chapter 1 as a oral drama, and we talked about some of the language and the meaning of the language. And then this one is going to be talking about the theology. And then the next one will be about the science. And so let me pray, and then I'll sort of give a little intro to this particular presentation, and we'll go from there. So, Father, we are grateful for the way that you do speak to us through your word, but also through your creation. And you speak to us in our hearts, convicting us of sin, giving us wisdom and insight that we might not otherwise have. And we pray, Lord, that you would open our eyes to help us to see things that are true, that we can see them through your word and also see in the world that they are true. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay, so there are a couple of questions that, in thinking about Genesis chapter 1, actually there are thousands of questions, but one is, what does Genesis 1 say? Now, let me give you my position, and you can find professors in a lot of different places that have different positions. But my position is Genesis 1 does not tell us how old the earth is. And so it does not tell us exactly how God created. It does not tell us anything about, say, the Big Bang. And so when you say, what is Genesis 1 teaching? It's not teaching us explicitly the science. When we talk about the science next time, what I'm going to say is Genesis chapter 1 is corroborated by the science, that the science is consistent with it. But to say that Genesis chapter 1 teaches the Big Bang, that I can point to this phrase, and that really should be interpreted as the Big Bang, I don't see that. But what I do see is I see strong concordance with the text. So today what we're going to be talking about is, apart from the science, if you were living thousands of years ago, what would be some of the lessons that you might take out of Genesis 1? And would those things still be true today? I would suggest to you that they are. And then next time we'll jump into the 21st century. And but the things we'll talk about today, I would say, from the time it was written, all through the Middle Ages, through the whole, these are things which should be considered to be true and undebatable and independent of science. So we'll see if we actually can get there. One of the things that Genesis 1 provides is it provides a definition of God, I think. It's a purposeful being that created the heavens and the earth. Can you find that somewhere in Genesis 1? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, but as Genesis 1 presents it, God can be defined as whatever it is that created the heavens and the earth. Now, there are some implications that I said from that. One is that God pre-exists all matter, energy, and the universe itself. God takes the initiative. God didn't have to create anything. And so he is the most free being in existence. God was not formed from some primeval ocean. What is that speaking to? Yeah. It's speaking to the common idea at the time that gods came out of either other gods, somebody lopped off the head of an existing god and now popped another god, or there was this primeval ocean, and from this came the various gods that were there. And so when we're saying in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, we're saying this God was not created or formed out of any pre-existing stuff.
Well, it says it doesn't say he did come from a primeval ocean, but it doesn't leave out the possibility that he could have. It doesn't say anything about where he came from.
I mean, in the first verse?
Well, in most of it.
Well, when it says that he created the seas.
Because the seas weren't there.
The seas weren't there. See, he didn't come from these primeval ocean, the sea, because he created the seas. See? So when you take the whole passage, you can see we're saying what it is teaching is that God did not come from any stuff that's pre-existing. He was. God was not formed from the body of some other God, like many of the myths taught at that time. And so Genesis chapter 1, Genesis 1 is very, very distinct from all the other creation mythologies. Because in all of those creation mythologies, there is some pre-existing matter, which is in some way primordial or self-existent, from which these various gods come. And Genesis is very, very different. So as far as apologetic value is concerned, you could say, well, can we agree that God is whatever caused the universe to come into existence? That's our definition of God. And now we can debate what are the characteristics of God, and we can have that discussion. But to say there is no God, well, by my definition, something caused the universe to come into existence. Okay, if we can agree to that, then we'll say that's what God is. Now we can talk about what is it, about the characteristics of that thing. Okay, and so there is a God. We can go on. By the way, I am interrupt driven, so if you want to raise your hand and ask a question here. Okay, God brings order out of chaos. Yes, Karen.
I just wanted to make a comment because you often hear guys like skeptic Michael Shermer, or you hear Dawkins say, you know, you all don't believe in Minerva or Zeus or Baal. I just go one God further. And of course, he's lumping our God, the creator of the universe, that being that is outside of space and time. He wants to lump them all together.
Yes, that is exactly what it is. He paints with a very broad brush. Mm-hmm. He definitely does. So one of the things that we see throughout Genesis chapter 1 is that God brings order out of chaos. And you see that throughout, especially the first 3 days that are there. But even in the creation of the various of life, he's bringing order out of chaos. Order is not the natural state of the universe. It's not the natural state of my kitchen. It's not the natural state of, it takes effort to bring order out of whatever it is you're there doing. And then the verse I have there, by the way, the picture on the left is Mars. And the one on the right is Earth. Okay? And so God did not create a life, a place which is desolate. He created the earth to be inhabited. And he says there is none else.
So can we go back to the order is not the natural state?
Mm-hmm.
So if God is a God of order, I would think that he would have pre-fall and even would be an orderly creation. Because I don't think he would have created chaos necessarily. So it may look like chaos, but in reality, outside of the Earth's boundary, I guess, I would say that it could be orderly, even though it may not look it.
Yeah, so we can sort of discuss what do we mean by order. Yeah. And in the way I'm using the term, the way I think you would take from Genesis 1, we don't mean neatness.
Yeah.
That if you look, say, just for example, you look inside what's going on in a living cell, it is orderly in some way, but it's not neat. It's a mess in there. All stuff is just going on. It looks like chaos, but it's very controlled. And so, but when the earth was first formed, and it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was tohu wabohu. It's void. And it's empty.
So which would not be chaotic?
Well, as you go through the flow and you see the theme there, you're separating light from darkness. You're separating water from land. So you are creating order. And we're going to put all this stuff over here in this cabinet. This stuff will go into this cabinet. So you're creating order. It was empty, and it was formless is the way it's normally translated. So
formless maybe.
Okay, so you don't like the word chaotic.
I don't think the chaos.
I just think God is a God of order and not chaos, because he's been in control of everything from the very beginning when he thought it. So, but chaos I associate with sin. As sin enters the world, then chaos kind of starts, right? The seas become violent. Mosquitoes have malaria. Man kills man. Love doesn't rule.
Right. Well, that's another interesting discussion. So, and I'll just go down that path a little bit, because there are some other points I want to get to. So, there is a way of thinking about the first times that basically says before Adam died, there was no sin, because a loving God would not have created a place that were sin, and there was no death. So all the animals were nice to each other. Now, I wanted to follow that thought just a little bit, because the argument is that because God is good, he would not have called the creation good if animals were killing each other. Okay, that's how the reasoning goes. So what that says is that because God is good in his nature, the whole creation has to be conformed to his character. But when God creates man, he says he created man in his image, which by implication says that the bear and the bee are not in God's image. Okay, they do not have the same kind of conscience that we do. They do not understand compassion like we can understand it. Now, can animals show compassion? Some of the higher animals seem to be able to. But you know what? That bee does not care. Okay? And if you want to say, well, before Adam sinned, bees didn't sting. Were they just nice? Did they not have stingers?
Yeah.
Before Adam sinned, did spiders spin webs? If they did, what did they catch in the webs? Berries?
Dreams.
Dream catcher.
If they didn't spin webs before Adam sinned, then what you're saying is after Adam sinned, there was a whole lot of evolution that took place to cause them to develop these spinnerets and their whole lifestyle that spider. And we could pick almost any animal that you want and have a discussion like this. But part of the teaching of Genesis chapter 1 is that we are created in the image of God. All the other animals are not, either individually or in total. Okay? And that's one of the major themes of Genesis 1. And we'll get more into that in just a minute.
Just to press that a little bit.
Okay.
I don't disagree that God could have created flies, for example, as spiders' food. But isn't there a sort of, when earth is redeemed, the lamb will lay down with the lion, or the wolf, and I forget the exact. So there seems to be something a little bit off kilter. So the way I kind of look at it is that some of this is like, the earth has a little knock in it. It doesn't exactly rotate it perfect, and it has a little wobble to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So could that be a result of a fall? Meaning that the earth would have spun different. Hear me out. You see where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
That there could have been just a little bit off kilter, so that maybe the spider's web catches more than flies, and maybe that malaria would have been a potential for a mosquito, but because of the fall and sin in the man, because see, the mosquito is just a vector. It's not necessarily they created the malaria. But now, all of a sudden, because of sin in the world, now all of a sudden their system allows them to be a perpetuator of disease. So again, just a little bit off tilt because of the sin. Not necessarily that all lions would have eaten all lambs. But now that they got a taste for, I don't know if this stands up under your reasoning, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Yeah. So when you try to think through it, and it's a thorny problem to think through. Okay. So let me first admit that. But when you talk about the lion and the lamb in Isaiah, chapter 11, I believe, it is a future. It's saying in the future this will happen.
Mhm.
Okay, it's not saying that's what it was.
Got it.
Okay, now,
Yeah.
now the way you have to go there is you then go to Acts, and you find a verse that says that that God will. I can't remember exactly how the verse says it, but God will restore. I think it uses the word restore things. And so the logic is, if this is how it will be, and God's going to restore it to how it will be, then that's how it was. Okay, that's the logic. Now there's a lot of interpretation there. Okay, so the Bible does not say lions used to lie down with lambs and never did a lion harm a lamb. The Bible does not say that. You have to take these disparate verses and push them together, and I think improperly so. But that's a much broader discussion right here. But what you've got.
If I might say, I believe there's a verse in Psalms also that says that God delights in the prey being brought to the animals. I believe there's a verse in there that says when you see the lions receive their food and things like this, that delights God. Now, that would go against what you're saying. It's not so much, I believe, the sin that caused the lion to be a predator. I think that was just in the natural design of the thing. That's my thinking.
Yeah. So if you go by to that whole line of argument, I have a book on my shelf, and in there the author Henry Morris says, before Adam sinned, there was no death, there was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no evil. Okay. He doesn't say this, but it's written in such a way that it means it's not just that it didn't happen. The world was such that it couldn't happen until Adam sinned. You couldn't feel pain until Adam sinned. Okay? And yet, what does God say to Eve? Your pain will be new to you. No, your pain will be increased in childbirth. So the scripture itself says, but the other thing is just, if you don't have a pain system, how do you develop your sense of self? You develop your sense of self because, wait, that's my finger. Do not hit that. To say that Adam could not feel pain, but you would have to then re-engineer a complete pain system to do that. To say that there was no suffering, well, then there couldn't be any pain either, I suppose. Well, there was not evil, human evil, but there was evil. I mean, Satan was around. And so, okay, we've gotten rid of three. Now here's the death. And so, to me, there's an emotional sense when you see Bambi being attacked. Okay, but when you see the big fish eat the little fish, there's not the same kind of emotional reaction. And so, I think that yes, that was part of the natural order, and yes, God called it good. And if God had not created man, but had come all the way up, stopped short of creating man, he would have a whole world, and it would still be good, but there would still be a balance of nature with carnivores. That's how I understand it. Yes, Brad.
From a theological argument, is the entire world one place? Because man was taken east to the garden and then was expelled from the garden after the fall.
Well, yeah, that's another issue. It was
so.
Yeah.
Is from a theological argument, is wherever the Garden of Eden is in the east and is now closed off to man different than the whole world when it comes to death and?
Well, I think that Eden was a specific place, and that it was an ideal place, like a greenhouse. Okay, and so when Adam and Eve were kicked out of it, they were kicked out of a particular place. So here the living was easy, And here you are going to have to really work for your living.
So was there no death where living was easy and
I don't
death where
Maybe
living
that
was
just
hard?
applied to the garden.
Yeah, I mean, is that a theological argument?
I wouldn't buy into it, but I'm sure somebody could make it. But certainly there was no human death before Adam's sin. Okay?
Sure.
And so when it says, that through sin came death, and death passed upon all men because all have sinned. Well, what is a death past? I mean, that sort of implies death pre-existed. Okay, so death went from animals to men is one way of understanding, but it passed from somewhere. Death passed, or is it simply saying it went from Adam to all the rest of it? But there is a way to look at that verse, Romans 5:12, that says death was already existing in the world and it passed to men because Adam sinned. There's another issue, if we're going to dwell on this, and that is the tree of life. And how do you understand the tree of life? And I tend to think of it as an actual tree. And being a 21st century guy, I tend to think of it as being some form of nutrition that would enable your body to deal with stuff. You stop eating this, and you begin to die. Okay? So, I mean, is that in the Bible? The Bible does not teach that, but that's how I think about it. So now let's say, was there a tree of life for the kangaroos? If man needs the tree of life to live forever, and the kangaroos do not, then the kangaroos are in a better position than man is, theologically, right? Can you see that? Because they're not dependent on the tree of life. Was there seaweed of life? And if you say yes, I say, well, that certainly is not in the Bible. But if there wasn't, and the fish were going to live forever, they got real limits on how much they can reproduce. But having said that, it seems that there was the tree of life was there, and God blocked the way to the tree of life. Can you imagine if we had somewhere on earth today a tree of life, like Ponce de Leon is looking for this, and we are going to kill for this tree. And I'm going to bottle the stuff up, and boy, I will sell this at a pretty penny. We are going to have so much bloodshed over the tree of life with fallen man. And so God did us a favor to block the tree of life. That's not Genesis. We're way out of Genesis 1 here.
Because I heard
Yeah, but these are good questions.
that the reason he blocked them back to the tree of life is so that they would be able to die.
Right. Lest they live forever.
Yeah,
lest they live forever.
Right. Like that's a bad thing.
Yeah. See, well, stop and think. If all people lived forever, okay, unless they were murdered, who would live the longest? The good people or the bad people? Okay? The bad people would kill the good people. Okay? And so, because Stalin has a limited amount of time that he can do damage, okay, he simply can't do any more harm. If he were still living, and start naming them, okay? But no, the good people would get trampled. And so by giving us a limited amount of time, God limits the evil. That's a blessing.
Yeah.
Okay? We don't feel it. It doesn't feel like a blessing. But when you look at it as a whole system, which God does, I think, it's a blessing that he limited our lifetime.
And yet he did provide a way for us to live.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Because he knew that was his real intention.
Yeah.
Or plan A, I should say.
Okay. Let's see what we have if there's another slide. Okay, God judges. He judges some things good, but the point is God judges. God makes distinctions here. He decides. He says the order is better than chaos. Shall we say formlessness? In the absence of a creator who judges, man has no objective standard of right and wrong. Okay? But God does judge. Good. God calls things good throughout the passage of Genesis chapter 1. What do we mean Now, there are some people who would say that it means it's morally good, and that means that no animals would kill any other animal because that would be immoral. Okay, but good has got. You go to the dictionary and look up the word good. There are all kinds of meanings to good, and I think that what it means is it was good for purpose. It's fit for the purpose. This is doing what I want to do. Yes, this will get me where I want to go, and God says it. And let's see, what is this? Well,
And John, I would say, because he said it was good, he didn't have to improve upon it to have his purpose be fulfilled.
that's correct.
So there's no changing of the rules along the way. Oh, I forgot to do this.
Yes, yeah. I don't think God was really surprised by anything that happened. We're not on Plan B, or C, or D. Okay, we're still on Plan A. So let's just relax on that. But it implies something about us that if we're created in the image of God, and we also can make judgments, and we do we not? In fact, don't you judge me?
But he gives us the encouragement.
I'll be my own judge, thank you. Yeah, but God does. Now, the other thing that's implied by all of this, because and we talked about this in some of the wording last time, the sun is not God because the sun was created. The moon is not God. The seas are not God. The land is not God. The rivers are not God. They're not mentioned specifically, but if the seas aren't God's, the rivers certainly aren't. Okay, so the Nile is out. You've got the birds and the fish and the beetles, all these things. They're not God because God created them. Okay, there is only one God. It's not stated explicitly, but by the process of elimination, which we've just gone through, you can see that there is no room for anything else to be a God in the way Genesis chapter 1 teaches it. So you have monotheism, which is strongly implied. Okay, God plans and he prepares. He planned the heavens for the sun and the moon and the stars. Okay? He planned the heavens for the birds, the sea for the fish, the land for the plants for the animals and man, the world for man to rule and man to rule. So we are prepared to rule better than any other creature on the planet. Okay? We'll talk about that because that's going to get us into some other issues here. Naming. God names things, does he not? What does he name?
The sun and the moon.
Yeah, he names the sun and the moon. Does he name those? He says the greater light and the lesser light. He doesn't actually give those names, but he names the light,
yeah.
And he names the darkness. Okay, and the implication here is that whatever you name, you have authority over. Now that theme doesn't show up just in the Bible. You can think of Robin Hood, and part of the story of Robin Hood, he's crossing this log, and a man comes the other way, and they have a little tiff about who's going to cross the log. And his man's name is John Little. But after all this thing, and Robin Hood brings him into the band, what does John call him? Little John. I rename you. And in renaming you, I'm saying I have authority over you. Two people get married, and do they ever have special names for each other? You name each other. So there's a sense in which you're saying, we have mutual authority. Parents name their children.
Yes.
Okay, and so there is still a recognition in some way that we have authority. God names the heavens, the seas, the earth, and God does not delegate authority to us over light, darkness, heavens, or the seas. He does over the land, over the earth. Okay? And the largest unexplored area on this planet is the seas. We have not yet figured out how to actually explore the entire ocean. God delegates authority, though, And he delegates authority to us over the bees, the sea creatures, the animals, and the whole earth, the land. And so we may be abusing it, but we have authority to do so. Maybe we're not wise about it, but hey, it's sort of like, this is my property, I bought it. If you don't like the color of my fence, I'm sorry about it, but maybe it's not the best fence, but it's my fence. And so God has given us the earth.
What about extension of like Mars or the moon?
Yeah, what about Mars?
The stars. We did
Mars
name
is
some of them. You can see.
Yeah, I will tell you my thought on that, and I have given it some thought.
Yeah,
We're not going to rule over them.
Yeah.
Okay, not in any strong sense. We may establish a beachhead, but to me, if you send 24 colonists to Mars, and you're going to need about 24 just to divide up the labor and be able to survive, there's going to be so much there that you're not going to be able to control. I think it's very likely, like the first colonists at Jamestown, the first colonists on Mars are not going to fare well. And they're not going to have any petroleum to make plastics for toothbrushes. They're not going to have any water. They're going to have to bring that or somehow produce it. There's just all kinds of things, and they're going to be fighting. They're going to be fighting over little things. It'd be interesting to actually get the real skinny on the space station personal dynamics. But I don't think we're going to rule over. We may land people on Mars, but we're not going to be rulers.
We're not going to subjugate.
We're not going to subjugate Mars like we did.
Well, it feels like a lot of the objections that you posed, the idea that people would be able to establish permanent civilization on Mars, are technical barriers that have not yet been overcome. For example, liquid water, evidence of liquid water was found beneath the Martian crust, beneath the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And from water, you can synthesize oxygen if you have enough. You can synthesize oxygen and fuel by splitting up the molecule if you have enough power to do that. It feels like there could be ways that a permanent colony could be established on Mars, and that could only get bigger as technology and science advances.
Yeah, so all the technical details you said are correct. Okay, that there is the water that's been detected or been, by extrapolation, saying the indications are that it's there based upon the various seismic readings and things like that. You're going to have to really subsidize that, and it's going to always be, I think, on the knife's edge, that any little thing that goes wrong can cause, it'll be like a house of cards. And so my expectation is that we will do that. We will get a colony on Mars. And Elon Musk may get his wish. He may die on Mars as he's expressed his desire. But having said that, I think when God gave us permission or commanded us to rule over the earth, maybe his silence doesn't, it says because it's silence, God doesn't say anything and we can't rule over Mars, maybe so. But I think it's significant that God didn't tell us to rule over anything else beyond the earth. And so I think it's going to be a challenge.
And also, when you look at our sphere, it really is a self-sustaining sphere. I mean, there's everything that you need in abundance on it, where there's a dirt everywhere else that we've seen so far.
Yeah.
I mean, like even oxygen, for example.
Yeah.
I mean,
So yeah. So if you play with the math a little bit, and you get yourself into a situation with this very low pressure atmosphere, 98% or is it 95% carbon dioxide, and we start producing oxygen from the water that's there, and use the hydrogen for fuel, and you can do all those things, and you lose 3% of what you're producing, you know, every year or every whatever, it escapes. There's a certain amount of loss. You're going to have to be producing a fair amount. You start getting 1 million people there on Mars. You're going to have to produce a lot. It's going to be incredibly challenging. Will it happen? We've certainly done amazing things that the people in 1900 could never have imagined. We certainly have. And so maybe, you know, in another few hundred years, I'll be eating crow. I'll be in heaven looking back and saying, hey, well, I was wrong about that. That's entirely possible. But at this point, I would say that the silence about ruling on the moon, you know, or beyond, I think the silence is meaningful. And so I think it'll be a big challenge.
Have they found any microbes in that water?
No, they haven't actually found the water yet. What they've done is they've had seismic readings, which based upon the seismic readings, they interpret that the best explanation is that there is water in certain locations.
Liquid water. There's already like water, like an ice on the ends. But
You think water, you think life.
Yeah, well, there is that. Yeah, that. That's right. You're talking about like the poles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more recently they've discovered some water, deeper.
Liquid water.
Yeah, deeper. So we'll see. So God delegates, but He doesn't delegate everything. Notably missing, we don't rule over the heavens per se, the seas, and we don't rule over ourselves. There's silence. God doesn't say rule over each other. And how is Israel set up originally? They don't have a king to rule over them. It's God who rules over them. So it doesn't stay that way. Man doesn't do very well. But in the beginning of Genesis, we see that God is silent about that. He doesn't say rule over each other. Man is God's image. This is the big thing. And I want to say that when we say the image is only an image, and that means that we're not the real deal. Okay. There is a God. He is not you, and He is not me. Let's see. So why not make images to worship? One answer is they're not real, which is what we normally think of. But the other answer is God already has done that. Okay? And we shouldn't worship us. But there is an image already done. Man is the end, the final step of creation. That's one of the teachings of Genesis chapter 1. And you may say, well, maybe it was this or that or the other. Okay, maybe so. But according to Genesis, man is the end of the creation. Philosophically, can God create another uncreated being equal to Himself?
You can't create.
Yeah, I mean it's a contradiction in terms, is it not?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is the greatest thing He could do short of that? Create a being in His image. Okay. And biblically, if you work through, angels have a lot of power and certainly some of the capabilities or characteristics that humans have, but somehow there is something missing. It appears there's silence there.
He doesn't say when He created them.
No, we don't get a lot of information, so a lot of it has to be sort of inferred. But we can say for certain we are created in God's image, and in some way that makes us distinct. Okay, we'll talk about a little bit what does that mean. And so in context, what does it mean? What does it mean when we say we're created in God's image? What does that mean?
We got responsibility.
Okay, we have some responsibility. In what kind of way?
To rule. To rule.
To rule. Okay, that's right. We have a delegated authority to rule.
The cat club answer would be
Reasoning.
Reasoning. Okay.
Reasoning, the ability to come up with and define languages like mathematics.
Okay. Do other animals reason?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Certain dogs.
I think there's soulish animals. You talk about that.
Yeah.
I think with the kind of the level of reasoning I'm talking about, to use mathematical language, to define the elliptical orbits, to land a man on the moon, I think not.
Okay. So let me ask you this: have you ever had a raccoon get into your trash can, even though you've locked it down in some way?
He's pretty smart.
But he's not
That's
smart.
Is he reasoning in some fashion?
He is. I think he's planning how to get in
Yeah.
and he's gonna find, right?
Yeah. Have you?
But does he understand the damage that he's doing to your trash can in order to get into it?
Well, no. So see,
That's not
this
implicated by
gets us to the
reasoning.
question here.
Yeah.
What is it just a difference in degree, or is it a difference in kind?
Language.
Well, more and more we are discovering that animals communicate in various ways. Even prairie dogs have special calls to indicate that there's an eagle or a snake, and they figured out certain these kind of things. So there is some sort of language that's there. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, okay? That there's language. So we say, well, language is what distinguishes us. Well, yes, Bud.
Well, the Cat Club answer for why are we created, how are we created in the image of God is reasoning, creativity, love, or four. And maybe it's
Worship.
creative worship. I think it's communicating.
Okay, yeah. But see, I would argue animals communicate. Have you ever had a dog indicate that he's hungry? Cat wants to get out.
I think it comes down to worship.
It comes down to worship. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Consciousness.
What makes us
Consciousness.
Yeah.
consciousness? You don't think
Self-awareness.
you don't think. Well, let's take the mirror test, which a number of critters have been able to pass, and that's the mirror test is where you take the animal and you paint a red dot or some sort of a dot on their face where they can't see it. Maybe you do when they're anesthetized, and you have a mirror there. And if the monkey looks in the mirror or whatever it is, that the crow looks in the mirror and tries to say, what is that on me? That indicates that they understand that mirror, what's in the mirror, is them. Okay? And most animals don't respond to that. They look what's in the mirror and they want to see they try to get behind the mirror to see what's there. So a dog doesn't recognize that themselves in the mirror. But some animals do. Okay? So they are, in some sense, self-aware at some level.
So I'm going to throw something else out. So no one has been able yet to come up with a precise definition of what exactly is life. Okay? What is life? Define it. Nobody's been able to do that. For that same reason, I maintain that. While I agree that other species who are soulish animals or not soulish animals are able to show some sort of communication or some sort of ability to reason if they can get into a garbage can. I maintain that just like pornography, you know what, you don't know how to define it, but you know it when you see it. I feel like these ideas of language and the ability of man to define his mathematically, I think it's amazing that the world and the universe is so comprehensible, that we are able to define it. We are able in some ways not to rule it, but to master it and understand it elevates us. Could I come up with a distinct dividing line and define that, where that line is between animals and soulish animals and us? No.
Okay, so go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say, just to sort of maybe give something of a typology for thinking about this question, I find it helpful to sort of put the answers in three boxes. The constitutional view has kind of been the dominant view through most of church history that locates the image of God in the way the human person is constituted. They have some attribute or some feature of their person that makes them God's image. And it's usually some of the things that have already been mentioned: free will, reason, ability to do right and wrong, moral ability, something like that. Another alternative is the relational view that just as God exists eternally as community, He's created human beings to exist in community. Man and female, he created them in his image, both together. And then there's the functional view, which I think has been mentioned, which is that human beings are in God's image because they represent God to creation. They exercise dominion, or if you don't like that term, stewardship, or whatever, care. Whatever term is you prefer. They have that role on God's behalf in creation. So I think even though those three different views can be parsed out in a lot of different ways, for me, I find it helpful to sort of understand this question in terms of those broad categories or generalizations.
Okay, yeah, those are good categories. We're not the first generation to discuss this, okay? And so Bob is bringing up some really good points. Did you want to say something, or you?
Oh, I was going to respond to the, just some of what, I forgot your name, but what you said.
Karen.
Karen, awesome, thank you. What Karen said, talking about, I feel like we need to be more explicit in how we're sort of drawing the lines between animal behavior and human behavior. Because if we're talking about language as a mode of communicating meaning, of taking meaning and transporting it, then I think that's clearly something animals can do. And we talk about humans having dominion, being able to rule over the earth, but we also see animals work in specific ways. Animals who in lab tests are able to understand, like rats, for example, they're able to understand systems and mazes and be able to solve puzzles based on knowledge that they have in the past that they can work through. Or monkeys that are using tools to access food, or beavers that are cutting down trees to build an environment. I feel like there's the line drawing, the line that is between things which humans can do and animals can't there's something that the line definitely exists, but it's probably not as broad as just language and being able to make utility out of an environment.
Okay, I'm going to use that as a segue because I think that's going to take me down a direction that I think I want to go. There are a lot of factors here, and one of the things that to say we were created in the image of God, God is the creator, and so being created in the image of God, we are creative. In fact, I would say some of us are compulsively creative, and it comes out in all kinds of ways, whether it's decorating your house, or whether it's trying to build something in the garage, or whatever it may be. We are creative, and you can say, as we're talking about the difference in animals and whatever, beavers build dams, birds make nests, whatever. But you know what? Beavers only build dams, and birds only build nests.
They don't advance.
They're not creative in the same way that we are creative. And so I think that is, in the context of Genesis 1, you have the creator, and it says he's created us in his image. Well, he's the creator. And so, and here we get into an issue which I think is, was it Logan? Okay, that sort of in the direction what Logan was saying, that when you have something which changes, and it changes by enough, it is changed by such a degree that it becomes a difference in kind. Okay? And so when you have a telephone, a rotary dial telephone, and you compare it to this is not just different by degree. This is different in kind, even though it's a phone. And so the kind of creativity that humans have compared to any other animal, I would suggest, is different in kind, not just by degree, because it is such a degree of difference that it's different in kind. Man is able to judge. God, we just saw that God makes judgments. This is good, and I like this, like the light better than darkness, and so God judges. we judge. We are able to rule. Now, some people make a distinction that's saying that being able to rule is part of the image of God. Others say it is simply a consequence of being in the image of God, and I don't want to really get too much of a big fight about that. But I think being able to rule is part of being in the image of God, and I want to develop that. We are also, in a sense, eternal. We are eternal, but we are not uncreated. God is eternal forwards and backwards. We're eternal forward. Okay? So, were you gonna, Brad?
Go ahead, finish.
Okay, so we are eternal, and I would suggest to you that the other critters are not. Now, when my oldest daughter was, maybe 6 years old, and we had Cat, and she comes and she says, "Daddy, will there be cats in heaven?" And you got to think about how are you going to answer that to a 6-year-old? And the way I answered it, as I said, well, Trish, what I'm confident of is if you need to have cats in heaven to be happy, there will be cats there.
This won't be that cat.
You know, yeah. I don't think we're going to be this cat, but you know, but you know, I don't know. You know, this is a great place. I think animals are absolutely incredible, and so I would be sad if there weren't something analogous to the animals that are there. So, Brad.
So, day 6, God creates man in his image. So, you take the literal 24-hour view.
Mm-hmm.
Adam and Eve grew up really, really fast, or they were created with age already.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the context of the image, one of the question is if you could magically take all the atoms and material you need and make a human being. So, I put you together.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, how would that be able to interact with you? How would that interact? And what a lot of science says is that it will be in parts, but it will be to a certain degree, but it won't be able to fully interact. Because when we talk about our consciousness and morality of views and all that, it's so much a product of how we were raised and the growth and nurturing and interactions and the development we went through as young people. And so I think that's also a part of it, that the animals, who we are today in our spiritual, mental consciousness and all that, can't be taken in a vacuum. It's so much a function of how we were raised and how our biology developed and how our interactions as kids and parents and all this stuff made us who we are today. Animals also don't have that aspect of life like we do.
Well, certainly.
So
some of them though. If an animal lays an egg and leaves it, then there's no nurturing that goes on.
You take a baby chimp and raise it as a human. It's not going to be human, right? It's not. But the idea that what is the image of God from a higher level consciousness, soul, spirit, all this stuff. In humans, it's interesting to think of it as you could create, like I said, create a human that just the raw materials, put them together, and everything flows, and the chemistry works, and everything. What would it be?
Right.
And it wouldn't be anywhere near what we are because it doesn't have that history and that memory and that learning to push it along.
Yeah,
and animals don't have that either.
Yeah, so you're saying that Adam would have been starting with a kind of an empty slate.
So I don't know.
Build all these things.
Yeah, I mean the physical part's an easy one to process. Did he have a belly button? I mean that the physical is easy, but when you're talking about the image, that's also a part of it too.
No,
and
I think you're right.
If he was literally created from the dirt, then if we try to think of how we are today and what we understand we are from a mental capacity, there had to have been some sort of preconditioning in there to function as a human, as we think of it.
And there probably was. I mean, we are born with certain instincts, but there's other animals that seem to be born with a full complement of their necessary instincts.
Instinct is a whole.
Yeah, we do learning in a very different way than say a carpenter bee. That goes through its routine strictly by instinct, and we have to figure things out. A lot of the animals, I don't know how beavers learn to make their dams. How much of that is raw instinct, and how much of it is learned from mom and dad, and where did they get it? I mean, those are all things you can talk about. For us, being created in the image of God, I think it means that we can be creative, we can rule, and we can judge. So the question is, what do we need to be able to do that? And I would say, yeah, you need a woman. But one of the things we need is we need to be able to have abstract and symbolic thought. And that would imply complex classification of things, procedural thought, contingent thought, and imagination. So classification, the first thing Adam is told to do is?
Name the.
I would say classify the animal. He didn't say, oh, there's Bill. No, that's a lion, or whatever. Okay, he's naming them as a class. And so I think it is endemic or part of our nature to classify things. Everything in any language except a proper noun is a class word. A table. There's a class of objects that are tables. There's a class of objects that are chairs. This chair may have a serial number, in which case I can talk about this particular chair. But the term chair is a classification. Lion is a class of animals. So Adam was classifying it, and classifying involves generalizing, which means abstract. And so I think this is inherent to what it means to be human, and I think it's one of the things that distinguishes us, that whereas other animals may do something like this, that you make a call and say, there's an eagle up there. That's a class. There's a class word that the prairie dogs squeal that says, there's an eagle, okay? But we don't have a dictionary like we do, and so we have procedural thought. We write programs. We have contingent thought. If this happens, and we do it, we worry about things, don't we? This might happen. What am I going to do if that happens? Well, it keeps me awake at night. And we have imagination. We can imagine things that have never existed, and then we can work to bring them into existence. Okay? Is that a little bit godlike?
Yeah.
Okay? And so that's kind of amazing.
When you name animals and you classify them, now that's science.
Yes, that's correct.
And so we were told to be scientists from the start.
That's right. You were doing the scientific work of classifying.
Linnaeus would be great.
Yeah. Linnaeus was one who did some of that. Okay, language, and certainly language is a distinguishing factor. I've made the argument other animals do in fact communicate, but our capacity to communicate is different to such a degree that I would argue it is different in kind.
If you think about, if you've ever read Helen Keller and Amy Sullivan, her teacher, and she was just a little hellion, and she didn't have any language, and they couldn't get the ideas across to her because it's so hard, like cup and abstract things and water, and there's water in the cup, and when she finally holds her hand over that well, how true that little thing might not be in real life, and she gets it. She immediately gets all of it. She just spends like the next days running around saying, what's this? She suddenly realizes everything has a name, everything has a class, everything is a thing. And it changes her life.
Yeah.
And she becomes, you could say, more human in a way.
Yeah. And of course, we can talk about Coco the gorilla, and there are a lot of things we can talk about.
You didn't go on the circuit like Helen Keller did.
Yeah. Okay, other thing is let them rule as opposed to let him rule. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. That ruling is not an individual thing. Ruling is a corporate command. Let them rule. That implies the need for cooperation, which is relationships. That of course in the Godhead, the way the Bible teaches that the Trinity, there is relationship, and there is definitely cooperation that's there. And then we have self-awareness. And again, as I argued, some animals do seem to have some degree of self-awareness. But I think our degree of self-awareness where you can go take a class on mindfulness and increase your self-awareness. But other animals do seem to be self-aware. They do cooperate. If you've ever seen video of a pack of wolves, they're strategizing, and they're doing a lot of things that to some degree are what humans would do. But the other thing, though, is when you put them all together, part of this being different in kind is not just that it is a different kind of phone than the rotary dial. It's that it is a phone and a camera and a computer and and a map app and a recording device for audio and a clock and on and on and on. When you combine all those things together, that is an additional difference in kind. And so when you have the difference in kind that we have in language and the difference in kind that we have in symbolic thought, which is related to language, and the difference in kind that we have in our sense of eternity, which the Bible says God has put to our hearts, and the difference in kind of this and that, and you put them all together, the combination, and this discussion that says, well, let's just focus on this one little issue of language, and so we've proved man is not different. Okay, that I think that's a false argument, because part of our difference in kind is all the combination of these things. So, why can't porpoises and chimps and lions rule? Well, they don't have the right stuff, if you will. And part of that right stuff, I would suggest, is how well could we rule the earth if we didn't have opposable thumbs? Now, I'm not trying to suggest that God has thumbs. Okay, that's not what I'm trying to suggest. But I'm trying to suggest that our ability to rule is in part dependent upon our physical bodies and how we are designed. What if we didn't have the fine motor skills that we have? Now, monkeys and chimpanzees can do things. They can put on screws, and they can be trained to do things. But our degree of fine motor skills is such that we do soldering, and we can make chips, computer chips, and
operate on the heart.
Yeah, operate on. Our degree of being able to just have fine motor skills makes us capable of ruling more than the other critters. What if we were sea creatures? How are the porpoises? However smart they are smart. How are they going to do as far as mastering fire? What's their technology? If we were a bunch of mer people, how would we have developed the technology we developed to rule the earth? We wouldn't. We have to be land animals in some fashion. What if we didn't stand upright? What if we didn't have color vision? What if we were 4 inches tall, 4 to 8 inches tall, really short? Or what if we were 12 feet tall? I'll come back to that. So when you stop and look at that and think, whereas in a spiritual sense, our physical bodies are not what makes us to be in the image of God, I would say. But our physical bodies are part of what makes us capable of ruling. We have the right stuff. And so God made us in his image and let them rule. To me, I think ruling is a consequence of being in the image of God and not so much the core of it. So other books for reading, and are we unique? This is written by a non-Christian, as far as I can tell, and he asked the question: will we ever have computers that are like man? And are there any other animals that are really like us? And he discusses it from a non-Christian point of view. So that's an interesting book. Becoming Partakers of the Divine Nature by Richard Tuning. This is one of the rare cases where I will recommend a book that I have not yet read. The reason I would recommend this book by Dick Tuning is because I sat under Dick's teaching for many, many years. I can read the titles and the chapter headings, and I can almost tell you what Dick is going to say. So so you can read the partakers of the divine nature, and then of course in the beginning, particularly chapter 4 of Henri Blocher's book, where he's discussing the first chapters of Genesis, and he's dealing with the theology of it, not the science. So it's after 8 o'clock, but we still have time for some questions or comments here. So at this point, anything you want to talk about, it doesn't have to be Genesis chapter 1, anything you want to bring up.
Can I just make a observation from what you're saying? It seems like one of the things we're saying is that man is fine-tuned to be rulers of the earth. Man is fine-tuned. God has fine-tuned the human beings, just like he fine-tuned the earth to support life, like he fine-tuned the universe to have an earth that was habitable, all of this. Is that sort of like what you're saying?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a parallel in that God had a purpose for making the carbon atom the way the carbon atom is, so that you can have carbon chemistry, which makes life. The carbon atom is fine-tuned for that. But our bodies and our brains, you want to get into the physiology, is designed in such a way so we are capable of accomplishing his purpose, which he states as rule the earth, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, everything that creeps on the earth.
That brings up an interesting point, just to build on that, because Jen, you're making the point that animals share these characteristics that we do, but it's such a massively different degree, that's different in kind. But right, all the other planets have characteristics similar to the Earth, and all the other planets, other places in space have the same mineral compositions and things like that you would find on Earth. But all of these different features are brought together so fine-tuned, so with such exacting proportions. Thank you. That it's just miraculous that they could. It just doesn't occur just anywhere, and it's kind of like the same point that you're making with human beings and their uniqueness. It's yes, this and that feature you can find in humans, in animals, etc., but just nowhere quite in the same sort of composition or proportional degree.
Each feature that we want to talk about, humans have it in an extreme degree, and then we have a combination of those. Is there an animal that sees in greater color distinctions than man does? Yes. Is there an animal that can hear better in some sense than man hears? Yes. Is there an animal that can run faster than man can run? Yes. So, but the combination of things, we are distinct in that, and I think that's part of what the Bible is saying is we were created in His image, the image of the Creator, the image of the ruler. And that would be arguing to say that being ruling is part of the image rather than just a result of it. Which is how I tend to think of it. But I mean, we can argue that case back and forth, and I've gone back and forth personally on that.
I think it's good and biblical to have that distinction between animals and humans. I feel another whole argument recently, though, is on the other end, and you sort of alluded to it, the computers and the AI. Are they smarter than we are? Can they become human if they just synthesize all this, knowledge and everything? I mean, I don't know if anyone's making that argument, but I feel like
yes, certainly people are making the argument that the computers will become indistinguishable from us, and some people are saying that, but
certainly their writing will.
we have how am I going to say this? We have a very different construction method in how biology works. No robot has anything analogous to a hormone. No robot has anything that would be, that's been built in to be like pain. And so people talk about when Skynet became self-aware, okay? All right, what does it take to be self-aware? Well, I have a theory. This is just jumping, this is not in the Bible. But I think pain is part of becoming self-aware. You are a baby and you have pain and you discover that table is not me, this is me. Because somebody hits the table and it does not hurt me, but this is me. And there is a condition where a baby can be born and not be able to feel pain. This is very, very dangerous, okay? It's very rare, but in one case that was reported, the mother sees her daughter in the crib and she's writing something on the crib floor, and she said, what has she got? She goes over there. Well, her daughter had bit herself so hard that she drew blood, and then she was just happily drawing because it did not hurt her at all. Okay, how do you discipline such a child at the age of 1? Okay, when somebody gets Hodgkin's disease, which is commonly called leprosy, what happens is they lose the ability to have pain. And so someone with leprosy will reach into a hot fire to get something that fell into it and burn themselves, and they don't treat themselves with respect, if you will, because there is no pain. Just as if I were sticking a stick in there to get it out, that's not me, and I don't have a sense of self in the same way. So for robots, that's where this all started. So for a robot to say, this is me, and I am going to try to do something which is self-protective, it has to have a sense of self and boundaries. What is me and what is not me? Okay, so I think we're very, very far away from that. Is it possible to build pain sensors? Possibly. Possible. What does that mean? What does that mean for a robot? I don't know. So yeah, it's possible. But this is an interesting book. He explores some of those ideas. And okay, Brad.
As we age, we get more mature in the image of God. Our consciousness.
We would like to think that.
And somewhere in here, I don't know what it is, but somewhere in here there's a discussion about the age of the patriarchs, the long lifespans of Adam lived almost 1,000 years. Do we, because we can't live that long, not have as great an image as Adam?
You want to know my clear answer? I don't know. I've never given that any thought.
I would say that a human being is an image bearer no matter if they live 4 seconds or 4,000 years.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean,
I'm just somewhere in here, so my brain's just rattling.
But if you're talking about sanctification, and that somehow because I've become more sanctified, and perhaps I've learned a little compassion and empathy over the decades, that the image of God is perhaps better represented than it used to be 30 or 40 years ago. And if Adam lived to be 1,000. But there are people, my father used to say, people don't change, they just become more like they are.
And we're born with the image of God. I mean, we start out.
We start out as the image of God, but some people continue to mar it more and more.
Right.
But if you look and you see, even somebody, pick somebody that's, generally recognized as evil or bad, Hitler. Could Hitler strategize? Is that somehow representative of the image of God? Did Hitler care about his dog? Apparently he did. And so he had the capacity to do these things. And even in that, he was in the image of God. Where some of this goes wrong is because I have the impulse to rule. By the way, you can say a little child, brother and sister, and the 8-year-old sister wants to tell the 4-year-old brother what to do. I want to rule over you. Okay? And I've heard someone say, well, that's just sin. No, it's not sin. It's the image of God coming out in the little girl. She wants to be a ruler. and so she's trying to rule. Okay, she may not be doing it very well, but nonetheless, she's giving it a go. And so Hitler, he has an impetus to rule. And it's all balled up in sin. But it still is a reflection, however distorted, of the image of God.
Well,
Yeah.
he was also trying to bring along an early Darwinism. His thought was what he was doing was he was just speeding up the idea of Darwinism. And when you're devoid of religion, as Hitler really was, then you don't care what you have to do, because
Right.
Darwinism was becoming its own religion in a sense, and that's what he was doing. I mean, he was an adamant and avowed believer in Darwinism and the idea of getting to the perfect human.
Yes,
The
he
full-
was. He definitely
Yes, he
believed
was.
in the dialectic that was going to push
Yes, he did.
humankind.
John,
Any other questions? Yeah, let me let Carmen go.
No, I was just going back to one of the things that wasn't mentioned is our ability to appreciate beauty.
That's a
That
good
goes
point.
with
Yeah.
being creative, but it really has no purpose when you think about it, right? It doesn't give us any advantage.
Evolutionary edge
There's
from
no edge
Or
and
utility.
durability or utility to it. There's no utility
Mhm.
to it, but and that definitely distinguishes us from animals. And I think that is a huge part in how we are in God's image.
Music.
Music,
Music,
right?
yeah, that's a
Music,
kind of,
right.
yeah. Birds sing, but they ain't Mozart.
Well, it's not for
I think-
pleasure either. There's a purpose.
Yeah,
Danger, mating. It's
Communication.
not for pleasure.
Bob, you can say something.
Yeah, I just, I think, wherever we come down on this question or whatever it is that makes us human, I think it's really important to stress that it's innate. It's already come up. People have already mentioned that. I mean, there's a business like right across the street here that the whole business model is liquidating human beings.
Right.
And, I was talking to somebody who supports that business recently, and I asked, within what is this thing that you're disposing of? Well, it's just a clump of cells. Well, you're a clump of cells. That doesn't give me the right to take away your voice, to dispose of your existence. I mean, what is that then that calls us to protect human beings? And so I just am throwing out that, that reminder that whatever utility or function or purpose, I think this image of God has to be something unique that's this transcendent value or this dignity that inheres in every person, regardless of their function, regardless of their utility, regardless of their accomplishment or achievement or even sensory awareness.
It's imputed.
Yeah, it's inherent in us. It's not that let us create someone who will eventually become the image of God. The bird, you can get to a debate there. Well, but Adam was full grown, but I scratch the word tend. The baby that is born, and even prior to that, is in the image of God, and has something about it that is distinct. And yes.
So you didn't touch on worship. And I threw it out.
No, I didn't. I didn't touch on worship. Maybe I should have included that as a bullet line. That. See, anybody else want to comment on the fact that we have the ability to worship, and that's one of the things that distinguishes us from.
Yeah, it was one of the things that would distinguish us from any animals or from self-aware AI is we have the ability to see beyond what is within our physical sensory grasp. I mean, pain is a good point, but humans are the only ones that can actually realize there is a supernatural being that created them. Animals can't. AI computers may become aware that that's what we believe, but they're not going to grasp it on that same level. Humans are capable of understanding that emotions. They're able to feel guilt and joy and pain of what's going to, or fear of what will happen to them when their physical bodies cease to exist. Animals can't begin to grasp that. AI computers, like I said, they may know that that's what we think. And they may even develop some self-protective mechanisms to keep themselves running, but they're never going to worry about, am I going to go to computer hell if I'm unplugged?
Because they're definitely not going to computer heaven. That's where the cover of the 64s are. Right?
So yeah, the closest that I got in my deck of PowerPoint presentation was the fact that God has put eternity in our hearts, and I think that our awareness of eternity, that even the atheists discuss it, and they reject it, but they are aware that there is something beyond us. Whereas my impression, if you see animals die, they don't have any angst about it. They feel something. In fact, I've had, you put a cat down, and I've shed some tears over a cat, and my daughter and her family had just put a cat down just 2 days ago, and so they're still going through the trauma of that. And the cat knew something was wrong. The cat knew it was coming to the end and would want to be in the lap, and more so than ever. And so they're aware, but I don't think the cat had any angst about the actual death, whereas we do, because we have a sense of eternity. And I want to say one thing, because we're getting close to closing. I don't mean to have laid out the definitive word on any of this. What I would recommend is that you take the next 5 years and puzzle it.
I don't understand how anybody can not want eternity. An atheist cannot not want it.
Well, I think, not to put words in Carl Sagan's mouth, but I read enough of Carl Sagan that I think his response would be, it's not that I don't want it, it's that I have no rational reason to expect it. So I don't believe it's there. Okay?
But I'd be searching for it though.
Well,
and they need to search for it.
And Carl Sagan was in enough debates and wrote enough, that you can get a sense of him. I'm just picking him out, but because he's a well-known atheist. But he would say that it's not wise. In fact, I think he said this to his daughter one time. It's not wise to believe in something when you have no solid basis for it. And he would say that we have no solid basis. I'm just trying to take the other side.
Yeah, of course.
Take the other side.
Of course.
Okay.
But he started to think about it.
Sorry?
He started to think about it at the end of his life.
Yes, he did. We actually know someone who shared the gospel with him. Hugh Ross shared the gospel with him.
And one of the last things he
Sagan
said to Hugh Ross was, Hugh Ross telling him about eternity. He says, yeah, I know. And he said, but one of the last things he said to him, pray for me.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when it gets down to the edge,
Yeah, I'm hedging, right?
Yeah. Well, he had eternity in his heart. Okay. He could not get away from that. This is part of what Francis Schaeffer, the theologian and philosopher, called the mannishness of man. You cannot escape your own humanness. And that is part of the sense of, I have a sense of right and wrong. And when I wrong someone, I feel bad about it in a way that I don't think my dog did. My dog is upset that I'm unhappy with him. Okay? But he doesn't actually feel bad about having gotten onto the sofa for the 44th time. It's just that when he hears the door, when he gets off, okay, because he doesn't want, my reaction, but there's the depression, there's the hairs, and, that's different than having a sense that I have done something that is morally wrong. Very different.
But that eternity in your heart too. I mean, death is the enemy. Of course, Jesus conquered sin and death. He conquered both enemies. But in this life, we have a sense that this isn't right. That people die, and we're right. It's not right. It's not. And so I think that's part of it.
Here's what I'm going to do. It's past 8:30, so I'm going to declare the meeting ended. I'll close in prayer. When you can stop the video, and then you stay around and chat, as long as you want to. Ask me questions, ask anybody questions, get into whatever discussion you want to get into. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you have taught us these things from your word. And we ask that you would stir up our minds to search for you, but in the entire search, Lord, give us a heart to worship you. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, that's
Appreciate
great.
this work.
I'll let you guys.
No story.
Oh, right. I didn't tell a story, did I?
Oh, that's
Hold it.
Extra credit time.
Take a minute. I'll tell you a story. Let's think. Which story would I tell?
The short way.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I can do this very quickly. So I don't think I've told you John Lazondak's testimony. So John Lazondak, I told you, I think, the story of him on the island, and wanting to have his feet on the wood floor. But John Lazondak was a hippie. This is back in the 60s, and hard drinker, drugs. And he went to one of these Woodstock kind of deals. So I'm not saying it was Woodstock, but it was a big a music festival, and there were drugs and all kinds of riotous living. And as John tells it, he had a Catholic background, so he had some knowledge of, he'd been taught about God, and he had some concepts of God. So as John tells it, the last night of the concert, he had a really, really bad trip. And so he is in this tent, and it is awful. And he says he remembers crying out loud to God and saying, God, get me out of here. And he, the next morning he gets up, he said his tongue was fat, he could barely function, but he, stumbles off. And every day, thousands of people that are trying to leave. And there's a road there. He didn't have transportation. So he gets out on the road, starts walking back. I'm thinking of this as being in California, but I'm not certain where he was. But as it happened, this road way out in the country, no traffic. So you had thousands of people walking along this road, trying to get back to the city. And as he's trudging along, he begins to be aware of some motion out behind him. And he looks back, and there in the distance is a car. One car. No cars ahead, nothing behind it. But here comes a car. And everybody's waving at the car, trying to get the driver to stop it. He passes them all. He stops right in front of John, rolls down his window and says, "You get in." John gets in. Off they go. They're riding in silence. John says, "Why did you choose me?" The guy says, "You didn't look as bad as the rest of them." He says, I hadn't shaved for 5 days. I've been sleeping in the same clothes. I had a knife on my side, this long. You see, this didn't make any sense. So they ride basically in silence. the guy gets up to the city and, pulls into some sort of a truck stop. And, John gets out, the guy rolls down his window, John goes around over to thank him, and the guy looks at him and says, I got you out of there, now keep going. And the guy takes off. And he's a little taken back by that. Now, he goes into work the next day. Now, his boss was a Christian. He knew his boss was a Christian. He kept waiting for his boss to get real. And what he meant by get real is to do something like lose his temper. Because stuff would go wrong and his boss didn't ever lose his cool. Okay? John had wrecked some piece of equipment and the boss didn't fire him. John couldn't figure that out. So he goes in and he says, I got to tell my boss what happened, And so he goes and he begins to tell his boss what happened. And his boss jumps up, runs out to his truck, comes back, he's got a box. He opens it up, and there's a Bible with John Lazondak's name embossed on it. And he said, I've been looking for the right time to give this to you, and I think now is the time. And so, John Lazondak, if not right on the spot, very shortly after that, became a believer. Okay? And so that's his story. He ended up as a missionary. And he was always, when I met him, he still had a little, shall I say, rough edges around him. But he loved the Lord. There's your story.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.